All right, those of you who have joined us, we're just waiting for some more folks to trickle in. We will get started here momentarily. All right, I think we've waited long enough. Some more folks will join us, but let's get started so we can make a good use of everybody's time. My name is Ryan Patrick. I'm the Vice President of Adoption at HITRUST, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's topic, ISO 42001 versus the HITRUST AI Security Certification, which is somewhat of a loaded title, but I think to a certain extent it's appropriate. And I'm really excited to be joined by the founder and CEO of StackAware, Walter Haydock, who is going to be the primary driver of the conversation, but we're going to be kind of looking at the HITRUST AI certs and ISO 42001 in a very objective way, kind of comparing them side by side. Not to say that one is better than the other, but this is how they kind of work together. I am, as I mentioned, excited to work with Walter. It's not often I get to share the stage, so to speak, with a AI privacy and security celebrity. So I bow to Walter and all the work, all the great work he's doing in this space, and I do not hold it against him that he was a United States Marine and I'm a former United States Army guy. This proves that we can work together when it matters and we're not always picking on each other. So, with that said, Walter, why don't you come on in and kind of take us through where we're going to be focusing on today?
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that introduction. And, some of us have not developed the taste for eating crayons that Marines are known for. So, if it's not for you, don't knock it until you try it. But all joking aside, thank you very much for having me for this webinar. Today, we're going to be talking through ISO 42001 and the HITRUST AI Security Certification, how they're similar, how they're different, and how they can potentially work together to help you manage cybersecurity, compliance, and privacy risk. All right, so this is what we're going to be going through today. We're going to be having a side-by-side analysis of both standards along all of these lines. For background, StackAware is both an ISO 42001 certified company and a HITRUST readiness licensee. We also help companies achieve ISO 42001 certification. So we don't have a dog in this fight, or we're betting on both dogs, so to speak. And that gives us a bit of objectivity here, I think, because we know both standards well and we help companies prepare for them. So that means that we are in a relatively good position to judge their appropriate use cases and their strengths and benefits. As far as some definitions go, I just want to be clear for any nerd snipers out there that when I talk about ISO 42001, I'm talking about ISO IEC 42001, the 2023 version, and for the HITRUST AI Security Certification, I'm talking about the AI Security Assessment with Certification. So I'm going to use that shorthand throughout. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Either Ryan or I will respond to them, or we may address them live if it's appropriate with the flow of the conversation. All right, so let's talk about the similarities between these two standards to start. So they both focus on AI. That should be pretty self-explanatory, but it's not just generative AI. They focus on all types of AI. I know that 42001 is part of a broader ISO ecosystem. It leverages definitions from ISO 22989, which is kind of a terms and definitions document. And also the HITRUST AI security standard also refers to that same ISO document for pulling some of its definitions. So this is not specific to generative AI systems. Predictive and even expert-based systems are in scope for both standards. Both of them can help build customer trust and manage risk. And both of them are certifications, meaning an external auditor or assessor must grant or approve the award of these standards. So it means that there's third-party review of your controls, your policies, procedures. And then neither of them is a silver bullet for regulatory compliance or legal safe harbor. With ISO 42001, there are some benefits or some bonuses in there where some laws that are already passed, for example, Colorado's SB 205 has specifically called out ISO 42001 compliance as providing safe harbor under certain circumstances. So again, it's not a silver bullet, but there are some emerging signs that jurisdictions are incorporating some of these AI standards into the regulations and giving folks an opportunity to avoid some regulatory penalties if they are complying with them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add here, Walter, is to your point, we're still early on in this journey, and there are some states who have started to look at what safe harbor may look like. But as the country, the world, and the market, probably more specifically, starts to gain a higher level of comfort, we're likely going to see more legislation or policy coming out. I know from our seat at HITRUST, we do see some legislative initiatives around AI governance and AI risk management, and they're trying to figure out what direction to go in, what is suitable. And I think everybody's mostly in learning mode. And I think it's only a matter of time before we see a lot more coming out that will guide, direct, maybe mandate, some kind of standard. So it'll be interesting to watch this space.
Yeah, that's a great point and a timely one, Ryan. So for the audience, we were chatting beforehand about the impact of a proposed moratorium on state level AI regulation that was in the recent omnibus reconciliation package that passed. Interestingly enough, that provision banning state level AI regulation for 10 years was stripped out at the end, right before passage. So I think it's going to be something of a temporary free for all when it comes to regulation. There's going to be a lot of different bills popping up left and right. You're seeing it Colorado, Texas, Utah, New York City even have AI specific regulations. And like like Ryan said, we are going to be in learning mode for a while because legislatures are gonna start experimenting. So we shall see how this turns out. All right, let's get into the differences between these standards. So I'll start with the focus here. ISO 42001 is a broad standard. It is meant to encompass a large scope of subject matter items as well as systems, and it applies to your AI management system, which includes topics like transparency, climate change, individual and societal impact. It also addresses cybersecurity and privacy, but that is one of many different topics that your AI management system must address, and the ISO 42001 system covers. The HITRUST AI Security Certification is different. It specifically and explicitly descopes many aspects that are covered by ISO 42001 to be very clear about what it is covering, and that is cybersecurity and privacy. So if you are looking for a very specific set of requirements and you want very clear representations about what you're doing, that would be a good use case for the HITRUST AI Security Certification. If you're looking for something that's broader and covers the entire AI management system and all of these issues, then ISO 42001 might be a more appropriate choice, but you don't necessarily need to choose between the two, and we'll talk about at the end how they can work together to help you achieve your objectives.
Yeah, I would offer here that the HITRUST AI cert um, is really focused on technical and tactical security controls around the AI system itself. So Walter pointed out that 42001 is more focused at a higher level on the management system around AI, and it doesn't get really technical or tactical in what controls need to be in place and how they need to be in place and the scalability of them and so on and so forth. So if you're looking for guidance on exactly how to lock down, harden, secure, so on and so forth, an AI system, High Trust is going to give you a bit more prescriptiveness than the ISO 42001 standard will. And what we feel is important, right, wrong, or indifferent, is we feel that all the domains that are within responsible AI, security plays a role in almost all of them. So it's foundational to making sure that you are able to operate AI in a responsible way. So getting security right has, or getting it wrong for that matter, has trickle down effects to the other domains of responsible AI. So that's why we're specifically focused on it. It also happens to be within our core competency. We've been doing security focused assessments for over 18 years. But I wanted to point that out that, you know, security controls, they matter, right? And how you implement them matters. And if you don't have the knowledge, skills, the expertise, or what have you on staff, you can use High Trust as kind of a blueprint. But again, not saying that you can't also pursue 42001, which Walter alluded to. We will get to towards the end of the presentation. So just wanted to throw those little tidbits in, Walter.
Awesome, thank you. And on the same note, as far as focus, ISO 42001 does not certify specific products or services. It is focused on how you manage risk across your systems. Now, you can scope your AI management system to include certain products and services. And some companies like StackAware, we have a very broad scope for our AI management system, mainly because we're a small company. But if you look at Amazon Web Services, they recently achieved ISO 42001 certification, and they included only 4 of their services. So the scope of your AI management system is something that you get to dictate, but the certification does not apply to any given system within that scope. HITRUST AI Security Certification is a different story. That applies to specific deployed AI systems and is product and service specific and evaluates how you manage risk for one or more of those systems. So that is an important distinction between the two and important to keep in mind during scoping conversations when you're considering your business objectives. What are you trying to accomplish by pursuing one or both of these standards?
Yeah, it's important to point out that when you think about the pervasiveness of AI so far, right? I like to quote a survey that I saw from McKinsey that said globally 78%, don't quote me on the number, 78% of organizations have either consumed or plan to consume AI in the next 12 months. And when you think about the fact that AI is probably already built into a lot of the products and services that you're already consuming, if you're a Microsoft shop and you're using Teams and other types of Microsoft types of tools, you've got Copilot. Well, that's an AI system. It's important to differentiate that 42001, you can include those types of systems if you're not directly managing them, because it's about the management of those systems as opposed to the systems themselves. Whereas High Trust, our security certification is really only for deployers and implementers of an AI system. So if you don't manage like granularly, like you're not looking at the way the model is operating, you're not training it, you're not doing all the things that you do to deploy a system, then the High Trust AI Security Cert is probably not going to work for you. So it's an important distinction to understand what's in scope for 42001 and what's in scope for HITRUST, because that will be, part of the decision cycle, and could be the reason why you go with one over the other and not both, because you may just be consuming AI and not governing and managing AI.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think we will elaborate on that a little bit in a subsequent slide. So definitely want to talk through that. As far as prerequisites go, 42001 does not have any. StackAware, for example, that's the only certification we have is ISO 42001. However, I would say that prior ISO 27001 or 27701 certification does help, because if you have an information security or privacy management system in place, you will understand the structure of these standards, and it's relatively easy to integrate 42001 into them. Granted, there's a very different subject matter that's being covered, but the structure is similar. For HITRUST AI Security Certification, it's a different story. To get the certification, you need an existing CSF version 11.4 at I1, E1, or R2 levels. And then the AI1 aligns with the 1-year certification cycle for the I1 and E1. And the AI2 aligns with the R2 certification cadence on the 2-year cycle. So also different prerequisites between the two standards.
Yeah, shameless plug. For the E1, I1, or R2, whatever you build your HITRUST AI cert on top of, if you already have an existing HITRUST certification, or you've built the system in the cloud, we actually have a pretty robust shared responsibilities model where you can directly inherit either from your cloud service provider to cover the foundational security controls, kind of the infrastructure security controls, or you can inherit directly from your previous HITRUST certification, which then alleviates the need to do retesting on those controls, which you've already been certified against. So there are some tools available in the toolkit to make that process a little bit easier.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that I think is worth discussing a little more in depth, is the inheritance capabilities of HITRUST versus ISO 42001. So HITRUST, you can inherit specific controls from suppliers, but with ISO 42001, there's a very flexible slash undocumented inheritance model. And sometimes I see customers get a little bit wrapped around the axle saying, well, is this our AI system? Is this third party? Is this built in house? And the way StackAware tackles AI risk is we don't draw firm lines between third party operated systems and internally developed ones, often because at times you'll have internally developed applications that are using third party APIs or open source models. So ISO 42001 kind of leaves it up to you how you want to tackle the inheritance question, but HITRUST AI security leverages the existing HITRUST inheritance model.
Yeah, just one more point on that as you go to the next slide. The goal is to extend the shared responsibility model to the actual AI cert. So as AI suppliers, deployers, so on and so forth, think about the big CSPs out there that have tools that you're probably building off of. Once they get certified, then the controls that they manage on your behalf for your AI system that you built on top of theirs, you can just pull into your assessment, again, alleviating some of that additional work. It's not there today because we haven't gotten them all certified, but they're working on it, so it should be available in the not too distant future.
Absolutely. So a little bit more on the applicability is, we mentioned the prerequisites. Any organization can achieve ISO 42001 certification. It does not require you to develop AI models or products. So StackAware, we do not train or fine tune any models. We leverage all third-party AI systems and models, and we are ISO 42001 certified. However, if you develop AI systems internally, you can also pursue certification. But that is not the case for HITRUST AI Security. So as Ryan said, developers, customers, and partners cannot achieve this certification. Only platform or product providers are eligible for it.
Yeah, I think I already I got ahead of myself here, so I already kind of covered some of this stuff. So yeah.
We're good. We're good. Okay, let's talk about prescriptiveness of the standard. So ISO 42001 is relatively light when it comes to prescriptiveness. The Annex A controls and Annex B implementation guidance provide some recommendations, but most of these are optional. If you are familiar with the 27,000 series, what is the equivalent of 27,002, which is a list of implementation guidance for all your controls, is actually included in the 42001 standard. The audit confirms that you're following clauses 4 through 10, but mainly focuses on how you meet your own requirements for the Annex A controls that you have decided to implement. This is markedly different from the HITRUST AI Security Certification because it's highly prescriptive, and the 44 required controls have specific implementation requirements that you must meet. And the validated assessment confirms, that you're meeting the policy, procedure, and implemented requirements, and then the optional measured and managed levels if you are pursuing that level of sophistication. So again, overall, ISO 42001 is lower in terms of prescriptiveness, and HITRUST AI security is much higher.
One thing I'll add here is the second bullet on the HITRUST side. It says 44 required controls. That's a max. Depending on what type of AI you're using, let's say it's predictive, that number is actually going to be lower. I think the 44 is if you scope in a Gen AI system. So there's additional controls if it's Gen AI.
Got it. So I'll verbally update that to up to 44 required controls. Okay, going in depth on the prescriptiveness issue, I'll just provide a side-by-side comparison here. So if you look at Annex A control B.7.2, or excuse me, 7.2, B.7.2 is the implementation guidance for the Annex A control 7.2. It's pretty high level. It says data management can include various topics such as privacy and security implications, security and safety threats. Yeah, that's pretty. No one would argue with that, but it doesn't really tell you exactly how you should tackle this challenge. Now, if you go to HITRUST AI Security and look at the same topic, specifically data inventory, it will list the exact situations in which you need to take certain steps, and then it'll lay out the certain steps, which means you need to ensure that the data inventory contains the provenance and the sensitivity of the data contained therein, and that it's updated periodically, at least semi-annually, to ensure its accuracy. So what would be perfectly acceptable is if you're merging these two requirements, say you're pursuing both standards, you could use the HITRUST AI Security Certification requirements and say, this is our policy for data management, and for ISO 42001, that would meet the 7.2 control requirements, and you could say this is how we meet the specific Annex A control need. So that is how they would potentially work together. So I do see a question in the chat. I'm just going to look through that, and I'll just say it out loud for those listening. For producers or providers that choose to pursue both certifications, can they simply extend their AIM scope to accommodate the HITRUST specific controls, or would this all be driven through MyCSF? So I'll let Ryan talk about the MyCSF side. From my understanding, there is not a way to include or incorporate ISO 42001 specific requirements in MyCSF. You could certainly use the HITRUST AI Security Certification controls as additional Annex A controls in your statement of applicability for ISO 42001, but I'll let Ryan explain how it might work in the opposite direction if that is an option.
Yeah, so In order to achieve HITRUST certification for this specific assessment, it would all be driven through MyCSF. That's the platform that all the work is done, and then arguably our quality assurance and compliance efforts post auditing and testing. Um, there is an opportunity to, and what I've seen organizations do is use HITRUST as kind of the foundation because, to Walter's point on this slide, it's much more granular. So if you test at the granular level, those results can be used as you move upward. So we're seeing folks kind of put HITRUST at the center of the combined assessments, and then obviously working with an approved ISO 42001 accredited organization who is probably also a HITRUST external assessor to achieve both. The HITRUST piece would be done through HITRUST, through MyCSF, but then the ISO accredited organization could do the ISO 42001 part.
There's also, I am aware of at least one platform that does have a partnership with HITRUST that also has an ISO 42001 module. So that would be an option. All right.
Great question. and
Yeah,
great
thank you.
and great name.
Okay, moving into quality control. So ISO is a standards organization. It is not an accreditation organization. It is not a certification organization. And auditors are accredited by the national accreditation bodies, which are primarily ANSI and IAS in the United States. And then these accreditation bodies will witness a certain percentage of the audits being conducted. That is different from HITRUST, specifically for AI security, but also more broadly, which is a much more centralized approach to quality control and the assessments, whereby HITRUST itself performs the QC on validated assessments conducted by the external assessors to make sure that they are meeting standards. So, anecdotally, I would say there's probably a little bit more variability in terms of what auditors are looking for from an ISO 42001 perspective, because there are not only different auditors, but there are also different accreditation bodies for those auditors, whereas the HITRUST mothership controls the quality for all of those assessments.
Yeah, folks may immediately kind of gravitate towards, well, why does HITRUST have to be so rigid and centralize everything? And this applies whether it's AI or just our normal or foundational security certifications. What we've found is when things are decentralized, the variability and the ability to regulate quality control becomes really, really hard. And I think we're seeing this as an example in the SOC 2 Type 2 space. These CPA firms are all, held to professional standards, but we're seeing SOC 2 Type 2s that are being done for, $1,000 or less, and they're being turned around in a week. And the quality of those assessments aren't done very well. So we've taken a stance that we can enforce and ensure that there's a standard across the board for all of HITRUST certifications that has proven risk mitigation outcomes. And we just extended that to the AI security certification because we feel that it's working. So just in case anybody was curious, that's kind of HITRUST's position on why we centralize things.
There's a question in the chat that I think is appropriate for you, Ryan, about CSF and potentially integrating 42001.
Yeah, so I probably should have looked this up before I got on this webinar, but I think it's in our roadmap for a future version to add 42001. I don't know off the top of my head what version that's going to be, but I would be surprised if we don't add it.
Understood. Okay, so moving to the latter part of the presentation, I'll talk briefly about how these two standards can work together. So Below is a list of 5 Annex A controls that overlap quite closely with the HITRUST AI Security Certification. Impact assessment at the individual level, which specifically touches on privacy, responsible AI development, acquisition of data for AI systems, as we talked about, communication of AI and other incidents, and then objectives for responsible use of AI systems. These are all Annex A controls that organizations can implement, and having a solid framework for how you do these things, how you approach these things, would certainly be an advantage when you are going through your audit for ISO 42001, but also in managing your risk more broadly. So using the HITRUST controls as part of your Annex A statement of applicability for 42001 is definitely an option and something that I would recommend that you do. Anything on the control side of things, Ryan?
No, no. I mean, I'll just reiterate a comment that I made earlier. I'm seeing organizations kind of using high trust as the foundation to support this slide specifically, because if you're testing to the lowest common denominator, then obviously you'll be able to apply that to the numerator, so to speak. So there's creative ways to tackle this when interested in pursuing both, I guess, is what I'd leave the audience with.
Absolutely. So if you want to pursue both certifications, definitely talk to me. So we offer quite a bit of free material where we put together some crosswalks between 42001, HITRUST AI Security, even 27001, that helps you knock out quite a few of the requirements of all of these standards. And you will get access to the slide deck after the presentation, and you'll be able to check it out. You could also grab a free data catalog and inventory from StackAware that addresses both standards requirements when it comes to data cataloging and inventory. All right, so we've been taking questions in stride throughout, but would love to get some additional ones as we move to the end of this presentation.
So, Walter, as folks start feverishly typing their hundreds of questions uh, into the chat, question for you as a practitioner, someone who's on the streets doing this type of work, whether it be 42001 or the High Trust AI Cert, which I know you've done both. Are there common pitfalls that you're seeing your customers be subject to that you can share with the group so they can try to avoid those as much as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think scoping is an important consideration for both standards, understanding what sort of processes are in scope, what products and services are in scope. Again, 42001 does not apply to specific products or services, but it can include within its scope multiple products or services. So making sure that you know exactly what's in scope of your AI management system and your HITRUST AI security certification will make things a lot easier. And it'll also allow you to ensure that all the deliverables you're creating are reusable across the two standards. So you're not needing to create evidence for two different standards, or you're minimizing the amount of time that you spend doing that.
It's interesting. I always preach that scoping is probably the single most important thing that you can do right up front for any kind of security assessment. Are you seeing folks like trying to overscope, or is it an underscope issue, or they just don't understand what to scope in?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of vague scoping that's the challenge. And, you know, some might say that this is heresy, but the optimal way to scope something, in my opinion, is to have an asset inventory that you know is 100% accurate. And there's a Boolean field on every item that says in scope for XYZ certification, true or false. With specifically with the ISO standards, that is not how auditors really want to see the scope described. They view it as more of a narrative statement of things that will be addressed as part of the certification. Whereas with high trust, that's different. In you need to get really in the details about your scope and say, this system's in scope, this system's out of scope. Here's the inheritance. So it gets a little tricky when you're trying to combine the two. I can certainly work with you if you need some help pursuing both certifications and getting something that allows you to cover all your bases, that meets everyone's requirements without leaving any gray area that can come back to bite you.
I think the heresy is not necessarily what you're suggesting, but the assumption that there exists this animal called 100% accurate asset inventory. I've never come across an organization that's had one.
Neither have I. Neither have I. That's why I thought you heard a little bit of sarcasm in my statement there. So yes, I mean, asset inventory is like uh, that's 50% of the problem. That's 50% of the issue for most of the time. Just as an aside, I was debating with someone on LinkedIn who was saying, I made a point that a lot of organizations have vulnerability management policies that they fix all high and critical CVEs within 30 days, and a security scorecard like scanned the networks of 1.5 million organizations and found that actually none of them fix all high and critical CVEs in 30 days.
Right.
And then somebody said, I promise you that I do this. I was like, I believe you that you fix all high and critical vulnerabilities of which you are aware. You know,
Right.
yeah, of which you are aware. I believe that, but you probably aren't even tracking a majority of your assets. So from a security perspective, it matters like what assets are you worried about protecting, and that's a key part of scoping. So that's my perspective there. I see two more questions that I'm happy to jump in and address. So Ogi asked, will these framework cover agentic AI assessments? So bottom line, yes. On ISO 42001, the types of AI that are covered by the certification are quite expansive and broad. So AI agents are definitely included within the scope of ISO 42001. ISO 22989, which is actually a publicly available document, which would be helpful to look at, specifically defines what an AI agent is. And StackAware uses a version of that definition to help understand what a given system is doing, but they are certainly within scope of ISO 42001, and they are also in scope of HITRUST AI security. So both frameworks cover agentic AI. Any additions there?
If I can add something, one of the things that gets me up every day doing this high trust work, something I'm passionate about, it is we're consuming threat intelligence on a monthly basis. We're consuming it every day, but on a monthly basis, we're doing analysis of the latest threat data and identifying what vulnerabilities are being exploited, and we map that or bounce that off of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and we get different TTPs and the recommended mitigations. And we're looking at the controls within our assessment or assessments and making a determination: are the controls in our assessments protecting against the threats that are happening in the wild today? And if we identify a gap, whether it's a flat out control gap or there's an element within the control that needs to be tweaked, added, removed, whatever it may be, we make that change so all future assessments now are protecting against the threats that are happening today. Nobody else is doing this type of work. I think it's a huge value add for especially small organizations that don't have the skills, the expertise, the resources, the funding to do this type of work. They're getting it as a value add through HITRUST. I offer all that to say, as there is more AI specific threat data that's made available, we'll start consuming that. And to your question around, agentic AI, types of controls, as we start to learn, we will make changes to the controls to ensure that they're protecting against whatever threats are happening to AI systems. So we're in a constant state of evolution to ensure that you're protected against what's happening today. So we're going to get there from an AI security perspective as well.
All right, next question from Steven is, are both standards seeing some sort of driving force behind adoption, or maybe are both Ryan and I seeing some sort of driving force behind adoption of either ISO 42001 or HITRUST AI security? So for the 42001 side of things, there are a couple different drivers. One is regulatory. As I mentioned, Colorado has specifically called out ISO 42001 as providing safe harbor under certain circumstances. Two are customer demands with respect to AI governance programs. A lot of enterprises are relatively conservative when it comes to what they want their vendors doing with their data. And some contracts will say things like, thou shalt not use AI, which of course is impossible in today's day and age. So 42001 is a way to avoid agreeing to bespoke, very difficult to implement requirements from different customers, while at the same time giving them assurance that you are operating a responsible AI governance program. With HITRUST AI Security Certification, the primary driver is from the customer side of things. So organizations that already have HITRUST certifications in place but are rolling out AI products will need to provide additional assurances to their customers that they are deploying AI systems in a secure and privacy preserving manner. Any additional points, Ryan?
No, you hit the ones that immediately came to mind for me on the HITRUST side. There's not as much regulatory pressure yet. I think that will come, as we've already talked about. But there are organizations today that are asking their vendors to get HITRUST AI certified. And I think that is only going to continue to increase. And then there's folks out there who just really want to secure these AI systems, and they're using HITRUST as kind of a blueprint in order to do that. So those are the main driving forces that I see. I think ISO is probably a little more renowned. So there's just the brand association that is driving some of the 42001 adoption. But as folks start to see AI incidents, breaches, whatever happen, they're going to start looking at, hey, how do I get a little more prescriptive in making sure that I'm locking down my AI system, which could drive them to do both. It could drive them to HITRUST. To the market will decide that in the future. But yeah, those are the levers that I see on top of what you mentioned.
Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? So my final sign off would be that if you need help implementing either standard or both, then StackAware is here to assist. And I will turn it back to Ryan to take us out.
Yeah. So Walter, again, thanks for joining me today. If anybody has any questions, or as soon as you leave the presentation, something just shoots into your mind, you'll get our contact information as a part of the follow up. But you can also find us both on LinkedIn. We're pretty robust LinkedIn contributors, so you'll see the posts that we have out there on all sorts of topics. But Walter's doing a great job specifically in the AI security space. So find us out on LinkedIn or contact us directly. And thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks a lot.